Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I'd like to welcome everyone this evening. I hope everyone's doing well. So this evening we've all come together online to practice meditation, to listen to some Dhamma, and uh, and even though all of us are in our own homes or somewhere else around the world, we're still able to come together like this and practice like this. Um, so sometimes, when we start thinking about practice, we can start thinking about and longing for the perfect place to practice. And especially when we start reading some of the suttas, reading some of the commentaries, we can really get this idea that we need this real perfect or ideal place to practice. So, in the suttas, the Buddha is always telling the monks to, go to these empty huts to practice, to go sit at the foot of a tree. And you read these stories about these monks and nuns going off into the wilderness and living in seclusion in the forests, or living in the caves, living in the mountains, and living in all these like really peaceful, quiet, natural, ideal places to practice. And then when you start reading about into some of the commentaries, like the Visuddhimagga and Vimuttimagga, they get even more into it. And they start saying and explaining that if you're a certain personality type, you should live in a certain place. So if you're, say, an anger type, you should live in a place which is like this, and you should avoid a place like this and this. And it goes through for all of these things. So sometimes, when we start taking that in, we start getting this idea that we need to have a certain place to practice. We need things to be a certain way to practice. And if things aren't this way, we can't be doing the real practice. We have to have these circumstances to really do the real practice. And that's just simply not the case. That's not how it is, because the practice is an internal practice. We do it, we're practicing with our minds, we're practicing with our hearts. We can do it anywhere we are. And if we're always waiting to find that perfect place to practice, it's never going to end up happening, because there is no perfect place to practice. Because the kilesas that we have, these defilements that we have, are what's preventing us. They're what create the suffering for us. It's not the internal external place. And yes, there can be like places which are objectively not very good for practice. So if you're trying to meditate and there's a full-on rock concert going on in the other room, it's not going to be probably not going to be the best place to practice. But we have to realize that there is no perfect place. So I ordained in the tradition of Ajahn Chah, of Lumpur Cha. And there's this story which is very well known in the Western Sangha, and well known around Wat Pah Nanachat. And so you hear it told a lot to junior monks or to laymen who are coming to the monastery wanting to ordain. And Ajahn Jayasaro would tell it quite often. So it was the first year that Lumpur Sumedho and a group of Western monks went to England to set up a monastery there. They didn't have any any monastery to stay at. It was this man, I believe he was a Burmese man, had this big house and gave it for the Sangha to use for the rains retreat. And Ajahn Jayasaro was just a layman at the time. I think he was maybe like 17 or 18. And he went to spend the rains retreat with them. And he became what's called a pakau, so like a white-robed layman who's keeping these 8 precepts. And so he had a great time. And at the end of the rains retreat, he went and told Luang Sumedho that he was going to go and ordain in Thailand, go to Wat Pah Pong and ordain with Luang Por Chah in Thailand. And one of the pieces of advice that Luang Sumedho gave to him was there's no perfect monastery. And so this is one, where we in the Sangha, we always have to remember that there is no monastery which is perfect. And you can sometimes see monks who or lay people who do get in this, they're always looking for the right monastery. So again, in Thailand, sometimes we'd see these laymen wanting to come to ordain, and they'd come to Wat Pananachat, but it just wasn't right. So then they start going around to all the different monasteries in Thailand. They go to Wat Mopjan and Wat Pabantad and all these different places, and there's something wrong with every monastery. So then they go into Burma and go to all the monasteries there, and then they still not right. They go to Sri Lanka, go to all the monasteries there, still nothing's right. And so they just end up going back home to their ex-girlfriend. And so, so and you'd see it happening again and again because again, there is no perfect place to practice. There are these no perfect scenarios because we have these defilements, we have this fault finding, we have irritabilities, we have greed, we have all these things which are going to we can find fault with any place. Give someone long enough and they will. And so and so you don't necessarily need that perfect place to practice. Wherever you are, you can practice. During my fifth rains retreat, I was at Wat Pananachat and Lumpur Biak came to visit. And in the central area of Wat Pananachat and a lot of the Ajahn Chah monasteries, there'll be signs on the trees with these different Dhamma quotes. So a lot of the ones at Wat Pananachat are quotes by, Lumpur Cha or Lumpur Sumedho or the Buddha. And in the parking lot was a big sign in English, a quote by Luang Por Chah, which said, if you have time to breathe, you have time to meditate. And Ajahn Kavli and Lumpur Biak and myself were going through the parking lot because Lumpur Biak came to visit during this panza, during this rains retreat. And Lumpur Biak speaks perfect English. So he did, if I remember right, he did his master's degree in New York, perfect English, but he prefers to speak Thai. He prefers to give Dhamma talks in Thai, but because his English is so good, when you're translating for him, if you make a mistake, he'll call you on it right then. So if you translate something wrong, he'll call you out on it right then in the middle of the translation. So he has this really good English, and he saw this sign on the tree which said, if you have time to breathe, you have time to meditate. And he pointed this out to Ajahn Kavli and he said, that sign's not correct. And Ajahn Kavli's like, what? And Lumpur Biak said, that's the wrong quote. The quote is actually, if you have time to breathe, you have time to practice. Because, a lot of times, um, we think practice, when we think of meditation, meditation is just usually the formal sitting and walking meditation. But there's a lot to our practice that we can do outside of the meditation, outside of that formal meditation. So, in our daily lives, we can always be bringing up some aspects of practice. We can practice generosity, practice dana, giving. This can help us overcome, greed, stinginess, overcome some of these coarser defilements, these coarser kilesas. We can be practicing sila. We can be practicing our morality, our behavior by body and speech. So practicing, the 5 precepts. Again, this is practicing Dhamma. When the Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path, not all the paths were just in the Samma Samadhi or right meditation, right concentration. There was a whole chunk of them. There was 3 of them which were about our sila, our morality. So, when we're keeping our morality, when we're keeping our precepts, we're practicing Dhamma at that point. And then when all these different moods and mind states that come up into our mind, working on them, looking at them, taking care of them, getting rid of them, and then doing the opposite, and actively bringing up positive, wholesome mind states into our mind, bringing up mindfulness. This again is practice. So we can do these anytime, anywhere. We don't need the perfect forest setting or the most ideal place to practice to do this, to bring up these things, to do these forms of practice. And even when it comes to a place to practice, sometimes, even though initially it may not seem like a great place to practice, or it may not seem like the best environment to practice, we can find, when we give it a shot and we go for it there, we can sometimes find out it actually is a good place to practice. So, for example, when I ordained at Wat Pah Nanachat, this is in Thailand, and a lot of times, when people hear monks or think of monks, we may think of Christian monks and being very, what they call cenobitic. So like, you just ordain in a monastery, you stay there till you die, right? You never go anywhere. You're always staying still. But as Buddhist monks, especially in like the forest tradition, it's the exact opposite. We move around a lot. And so when you first ordain, your first 5 years, you're in what's called nisaya or dependence. So it's not up to you where you go. It's all up to your teacher. He tells you go here or go there and do this, do that. So the first 5 years, you're completely dependent on him. He tells you what to do. After that, you become like more of a free agent and you can decide where you go. But that first period, you're under dependence on your teacher. And so in our style, you get moved around a lot and to a lot of different monasteries with and very different environments, very different practice styles at them. And some of the ones we have that you go stay at as a junior monk are absolutely amazing. Deep in the jungles and huge trees and elephants and tigers and monkeys and waterfalls and mountains, or other ones where you're staying in caves and overlooking the Mekong River, or some of these huge beautiful uh natural places. And so as a junior monk, I was moving around, being sent to all these different places, sent to stay at Wat Mopjon, again, huge, beautiful monastery there, big old trees. It's developed a lot since I was there. It was more simple then, but all these different places. And then when I was four pansa, so 4 years as a monk, just less than a year before I finished the dependence, Ajahn Kavli sent me to go stay with Lumpur Biek. And Lumpur Biek is, a phenomenal monk. He's very respected in the practice circles in Thailand. And, he's one of like the most respected students of Ajahn Chah, and he gives great teachings on meditation and really pushes you to meditate. But his monastery, like physically, like when you get there, it sucks. Like it's a very small monastery. And when they had and everything's very, very close together in the monastery, not too many trees. And when they originally built it, it was 20 kilometers from Bangkok. So a good distance. And I talked to monks who were there at the time when it first started, and they said all you could see around the monastery was just fields. You couldn't see a thing. But that was back in the 70s. And so Bangkok has exploded since then. So now it's in like the suburbs of Bangkok, and not like the fancy nice suburbs of Bangkok either. It's, the area can be a little a little a little colorful, the area it's in. And so and all the kutis, all the huts are very close together. You have no privacy at all. You're very close to the monastery wall, and there's houses right up against the wall. You can hear what's going on. So it seems like it would be like just the opposite of what you'd think a good place to practice was. But then you go there and you start practicing, and you know, I found it was great for practice. And most monks I've spoke to talk about having some of the best meditation they've ever had there. And so, it really challenges that these ideas of what you need for a good practice monastery and what you need as a good environment to practice in. And because the monastery is so not ideal, Lumpur Biek would talk about this and he'd teach about this and how to use this as a way to practice. So he said, yeah, and he said this many, many times that when you're developing samadhi, he said there's two types of samadhi. There's samadhi with a roam and samadhi without a roam. So samadhi is like our concentration, our like the meditation, the concentration, the tranquility, the peaceful meditations. And arome is this Thai word. It can mean sometimes it can mean mood. Like if you're saying someone's got a bad arome, means they're in a bad mood. But it also comes from the Pali word aramana. So this would be like sense impingements. So he's saying you can develop samadhi without sense impingements. And he would explain and say, this is like when you go off and live in the forest. You go live in the forest and it's very quiet and beautiful and peaceful. And he said, in those ideal circumstances, the mind becomes peaceful very quickly. And it's very easy to make the mind peaceful. But then he said, once you come out of that situation, out of those circumstances, what can happen sometimes is that your meditation falls apart. So you're living in this peaceful, quiet place, and you come out, and all of a sudden, you're just all the noise, the sounds, the sense impingements come in, and you can't handle that, and your meditation falls apart. And which I would think is kind of similar to, say, when someone goes on a meditation retreat. And sometimes it happens, someone goes on, say, a meditation retreat for a week or 10 days, and everything there is perfect. There's the perfect setup, and everyone's there to practice, and it's beautiful, and it's quiet, and everything is supportive. And people find their minds get peaceful really quickly, and everything's going very well, and which is great. But then at the end of it, they go home, and then kind of life comes back at them. They turn the TV back on or go back on their phone and go to work and stuff, and they find they lose all that peacefulness they had had. So that's kind of like that's the samadhi without a roam. But then the samadhi with the roam is where you do have these different sense impingements. You don't have the most ideal circumstances for practice. And so for in these circumstances, making the mind peaceful is much more difficult because you don't have those perfect, ideal supporting circumstances. But if you are able to make the mind peaceful in these circumstances, that samadhi, that concentration, that peacefulness you've gained is a very firm, very strong peacefulness. So it's one which isn't shaken a lot because you've managed to do it when the circumstances aren't right. And so, again, this isn't like saying that you should go out and find the worst circumstances to practice, but even in these situations where we don't have what we think is an ideal place to practice or an ideal environment to practice, we can still benefit. We can still make the mind really strong from in this circumstance. And again, as we're doing the practice and as we're working on this, we're working on this internally. We're working on these different moods, these different mind states that can come up in our own minds. So as long as, we have our own minds, we're able to look at ourselves, we're able to bring up that mindfulness, bring up that right effort of dealing with these different mind states when they come up. Um, we'll be able to practice and we'll be able to benefit wherever we are. And so we just have to see that sometimes it is just the mind making excuses not to practice as well. There's in the suttas, there's these lists of reasons for or for monks to get lazy. And Lumpur Liam, he likes to talk about these, but he expands on them and adds some of his own to them. So there's stuff like, oh, I can't practice because I'm going on a journey, or oh, I can't practice because I just got back from a trip, or oh, I can't practice because we're going to be doing work today, or oh, I can't practice because I'm tired from work. All right, and Lumpur Liam adds like, oh, I can't practice because it's too hot out, or I can't practice because it's too cold out. And you can think of all these reasons that the mind will make up like this reason. Oh, I can't do it because of this, because of that, or we'll get into that planning where your mind's like, okay, I'll start doing it tomorrow. Okay, I've got this big task, and you just kind of procrastinate. Tomorrow's the day I'm going to start it. And that tomorrow For a lot of people, when your mind gets into that procrastinating, that tomorrow never comes. So I know some monks who we have this chanting. It's called the Patimokkha, and it's the monks' rules. It's the 227 rules, and every 2 weeks, the monks who are living together in a monastery, if there's enough of them, they get together, and one of the monks gets up and chants these rules. And the style we do in Thailand is that you have to memorize this. And so it's a big chant to memorize. Like chanting it fast takes about 45 minutes. And so some monks learn very quickly. I know one monk who's the abbot of a monastery in Australia, and it only took him 1 month to learn it phenomenally fast. For me, it was many, many months to learn it. But but uh and so it takes like a good concerted amount of effort for a period of time. Like you got to kind of get serious about it and just go for it for a serious chunk of time. And you'll meet these some monks who are always planning to do it. They're always, oh, this next rains retreat, I'll do it. I'll make it my rains retreat project. And after a certain number of years, you kind of realize you're like, yeah, they're never actually going to learn this. So again, it's just another one of these ways the mind, like, can trick us and into not practicing, into not doing something. So I would like to offer this as a bit of a reflection for everyone this evening.